What is the official reason for the collapse of the World Trade Center towers?
Well, we're told that the planes hit the buildings, and there was an explosion and a fire, and about an hour and a half later, in the case of the North Tower, the buildings collapsed due to structural weakening due to the fires. The problem is that we don't have large gradual deformations associated with collapses, and fires in high-rises have never brought down a steel frame high-rise building at all, ever. And what we have, unfortunately, is the evidence in the Twin Towers and the third skyscraper to collapse that day, which most people don't know anything about it. We have the evidence of the 10 key features of controlled demolition. In the case of Building 7, it collapses straight down into its own footprint at free fall speed in the first 100 feet. It's dropping, as you can see, symmetrically, smoothly, at free fall speed in the first 100 feet, 2.5 seconds. This is uncanny. There's 40,000 tons of structural steel designed to resist this collapse.
So what, a 47-story building?
Yeah, it's just called Building 7, right a football field away from the Twin Towers.
Oh, okay, so what we're showing is left what happened. In fact, right is a controlled where you are using, or the people who made this happen, used demolition.
Indeed, and this is a direct comparison. And you can see that, indeed, almost free fall speed, free fall acceleration through 40,000 tons of structural steel. That is uncanny. So we have 700 architects and engineers demanding a new investigation as a result of this evidence and the evidence in the World Trade Center that is very explosive. Almost every architect and engineer we show this information to agrees with us that these are controlled demolitions. If we can get them to look at the information, because obviously the implications of a controlled demolition are dark for our country, because that means somebody besides Al-Qaeda was involved, because these have to be easily 3 of the most highly secure buildings outside the Pentagon.
Now, if that was a controlled demolition, would there not be any evidence at the ground level of explosives within the building itself, that's the debris that's left?
Indeed, and what we find down there is pools of molten iron.
What does that mean?
Several tons. Exactly. What is that doing there? The first responders see it, the structural engineers see it. It's documented by FEMA, the melting of steel. Normal office fires is what's supposed to have brought these buildings down, along with jet plane impacts. The jet fuel and office fires don't produce molten iron or molten steel. It doesn't begin to melt until 3,000 degrees. But what we have is the fires only produce maybe 1,600 degrees. So what produced all that molten iron? Well, it has in it the chemical evidence of a special incendiary, which is thermite, a high-tech incendiary used to cut through steel like a hot knife through butter. Indeed, in all of the dust throughout lower Manhattan, we have a 4 to 6 inch thick layer of this dust, and throughout it we have evidence of tiny spheres, billions of them, several tons of previously molten iron. Well, how does that happen? If you have molten iron, the byproduct of thermite is molten iron, and it's dispersed throughout all of this dust.
Now, you were allowed to go in and get samples and examine it?
Oh, there's plenty of dust. A lot of people have this dust, and 4 of these samples have been sent to physicist Stephen Jones, formerly of Brigham Young University. And they find in it not only these spheres, which others have found too, USGS, R.J. Lee, doing toxicological studies. These spheres have iron, aluminum, fluorine, manganese, very unusual elements associated only with thermite. And there's small chips of unignited thermite as well. This is very high-tech thermite, nanothermite. It's not found in a cave in Afghanistan. It's produced in very sophisticated Defense Department contracting laboratories. Well, what you have to ask is who had access to the buildings? Did Al-Qaeda have access to these highly secure buildings? Probably not. Did they have access to sophisticated nanothermite, where the particles are 1,000 times smaller than a human hair? Probably not. Somebody else has to be investigated, and that's why we have 700 architects and engineers demanding a real investigation. We don't have the whole theory as to how this happened, who did it, why. We just lay out the facts like we did last night in the Veterans Memorial Auditorium, and we demand a real investigation, and they'll find out who, why, how, etc.
Okay. Then let me ask you, I'm person X. I want to place something in one of those buildings. Where would I carry it? How big would it be? Is it that visible that I would be spotted by security, or could I place it in one of my tooth fillings?
Yeah. We're talking about several tons of nanothermite and ordinary thermite. One would have to have access through security. So the security company involved for the World Trade Center should be thoroughly investigated. And it turns out to be Securicom, Stratosec. Somebody should look and see who's on the board of those companies. Some very interesting individuals turn out to be. In addition, one would have to have the cover of, say, an elevator modernization, which was, in fact, going on 9 months prior to 9/11, so that there were workers throughout the World Trade Center and had access to the hoistway, which is immediately adjacent to the core columns and beams in the building.
Let's take a look now then at these 14 floors above the damage where the plane came in as a block in the North Tower. And let's do two things. Let's have a giant crane and imagine that picks up 14 floors and just drops them in air. You know, no building below, just drop them in air. How long will it take for the roof to get to the ground when you do that? Well, it works out to just about 9 or 10 seconds. There's some air resistance, but pretty much ignore that. The height of the North Tower, 1,368 feet. If you dropped a steel ball in vacuum, it would drop in 9.2 seconds. So we got this big block. We're doing the same thing, except we're dropping it in air. And, 9 or 10 seconds is what you'd expect. Now, how long did it actually take the building to collapse? Well, it's about 10 seconds, maybe 12. It's a little hard to tell now because there's so much dust. But if you look at the seismic record, when the shaking started, as that building started coming down, when it ends, just about 10 seconds. Okay, now we've done that one experiment. We drop it in air, 10 seconds. Now you take the same block and you drop it over the rest of the tower that's still there. You've got 47 core columns below, 240, these are steel columns going up the center of that thing, huge. At the base they're 4 foot by 2 foot, steel. Okay, interconnected columns, designed to stay standing, not to just give up, when something hits them. And then you've got 240 perimeter columns. Now you drop that block of 14 stories, okay, above the damage zone. You don't that drop on the rest of the building. What happens? Well, which is going to take longer? The one you drop in air or the one you drop on, a couple 100,000 tons of steel and concrete that's designed to remain standing? Which is going to take longer? The one that you drop on the building obviously should take a lot longer than the one you just drop in air. The situation, when you time it, it's essentially free fall speed. Goodness, how does that happen with all this steel in the way? We need to look at conservation of energy and momentum. That analysis has been done by Professor Cutler, professor of mathematics. He comes up with 36 to 40 seconds, just this block hitting stationary matter. And now you throw in the columns, and this gets us to Gordon Ross, a mechanical engineer in the United Kingdom. He says you put in the columns and conservation of energy and conservation of momentum. None of those looked at by FEMA and NIST, you see this. His final result is that the upper block will stop. The destruction goes a ways, but then it stops. I mean, why should we assume that the building below just gives up? No. That upper block goes a ways, and then it stops. And it might actually fall off due to asymmetry. That's what you expect. You don't expect it to fall straight down at near free fall speed unless you get the material out of the way below. The way that's done is with explosives.